So we're going to continue in our course of blueprint reading, and we're going to discuss Unit 4 from the text, Lines and Symbols. Your learning objectives in this unit are to be able to identify the common types of lines used on prints and identify those features of those different lines and be able to match drawing symbols with their meanings. Technical terms. These are words that you're going to use common every day when you're working in this particular field or discussing a particular drawing. Alphabet of lines. So that is pretty much as it sounds, a list, I wouldn't say complete, but a list of lines. We call them an alphabet because each line has its different meaning. Arrowheads, so the ends of those lines, of dimension lines, or some other type of symbol, basically point of reference. Border lines, lines that typically trace the border or outline a particular area that you're looking at. Break lines, so they represent that this is just a piece of a drawing, so it's broken off at that point or across that section. You have your center lines, which is a line used as a point of reference to represent the center of an opening or the center of a space. You have dimension lines, which give you the actual dimension and of a particular length or a size, and the lines associated with that dimension from point to point. Dimension lines usually have arrowheads on them. And then the extension lines, which extend from the dimension lines to the points of reference that you're measuring, or the other way around. They extend from corner to corner and they extend up into the dimension lines so that you get a clear idea of the line or dimension that we're looking at. Hidden lines, they are typically like a dashed line that represent a line at a different layer or elevation. If we're looking at something in a plan view, we're looking down on something, and we may be wanting to have objects that are at different elevations in that drawing, but we don't see them because they might be on top of each other, or they are not at the same level as other lines that are represented in that drawing. So there would be a dash to give the hidden line. So if a line were to travel behind an object, then it would turn into a hidden line. Leaders, we'll see examples of leaders. Legends give you, it's like a reference. It's kind of like a library, but an index of different objects, either lines or abbreviations or symbols, so that you know when you see a symbol what it means, its intended meaning. Object lines, again, we'll see examples of object lines. Property lines, they typically would outline the area that represents the property, or a property line, or multiple property lines. If you're looking at a larger map, if you will, you can see all the lines of the different properties that could be placed on a on a parcel map, which is typically registered with a city or a municipality. Section cutting lines. So these are lines that represent a particular section of a drawing that's being sliced through, and they show you a point of direction that you'd be looking at when you were cut through that section. And then the actual section lines. So the cutting lines would be the lines that go through the object, and the section lines, well, we'll get an example to see what those differences are. But it's the rest of the line with a flag or a symbol that points in the direction that you're looking at. So as we get introduced to these lines and symbols, we're going to be reading construction prints. And so this is a perfect example of a floor plan that you would see in both a residential or a commercial application. We'd say more commercial because it seems to be a little more of a higher level of what you would, and it's something typical that you'd see in a commercial situation. But all of what we had spoken about previously is here. So in this particular drawing, you can see, for example, this dashed line and solid lines, which represents walls. The dashed lines are the hidden lines that run in parallel to the walls, because these represent the outside of a particular space. You can see there's a dashed line that gives you the look of a square. So that particular line that I'm going is the outside of the foundation or the footing. So you can see when the footing gets to corners or at certain key points, reference to these lines here, these column line symbols. You've got columns, and then you've got symbols that, see, these are also column line symbols. These are numbered from left to right, and these are lettered vertically up and down. And it's a way to identify a symbol. You can say symbol F.6 or 0.8. Right? They intersect at F6.0.8. This particular column intersects at F6 1.4. See? And you can see F-6 with a letter M, and it says base LC. So if you're able to look at that, what we speak of on the ledger or the legend, you'd be able to find out what some of these abbreviations mean. Here, let's see. So here, hidden line. Here's a section symbol, right? We spoke about earlier. This is the section line or the cutting plane, the cutting line that goes right through that wall. It also crosses that dashed line, and it crosses this dotted line. And then it has this flag, which is on a particular side of the line, with down, if you can see it's pointing down. It's telling you that it's looking in that direction if you slice through that symbol. And then S-4 would be the page number where you could go find that particular section or detail, if you want to call it. Some people want to call it a detail. That's not yet a detail, but it's like a detail. S-4. And it would be picture the letter I, or 1, whatever that is. I think it's an I. And then over here we see an example of an object line. So this line, this solid line that goes around here, represents that particular object in the floor plan. And in this particular case, that object would be a T/F. So something /FTG, which would be, I would guess, a footing. And then it has 99 feet 0 inches. So it's saying that this thing stands tall. It's some type of column, like in a parking garage, and it extends floor through floor through floor. That's the way I would understand it, because it says here that it's 99 feet. And it can't be 99 feet horizontal, or it would extend off the page. Then this is a leader line. The leader line is the line that extends to whatever text you have, and it leads you to a particular point from these arrows, where the arrows end or start, with a note at the other end saying what is important about those particular points. And it says install or embed something at the end of the FDN. We may assume it's the foundation wall for support of precast. Okay, so there's a note and a comment there associated with that leader line. This is the center line. If you notice here, it's a solid dash, solid dash, solid dash. So that is and it's going right through column F and number 1, F1. And you can see it's going right through the center of that column. And where the two lines cross each other makes a point, an actual reference point. And that's what's being referred to. So when you see F and G, it even looks as F and G is going through the center of this column. And then you can tell it's by 1.5 feet, 1.5 feet by this dimension line, which is referencing that center line. So this extension line is pointing to the outside corner of the wall, whereas the center line for G is referencing the center of that particular object, which is a column in this case. And so point of reference or point of measurement is 1.5 foot from the outside corner to the center. Those are important to know when you're pouring the foundation and then having the wall set in relationship to that foundation, so that these dimensions mean something. You see, you have again another 1.5 feet that's referencing from the center line off of center column line symbol 0.5. So we could say this is center line 0.5 and this is center line G. This is center line 1, and it's intersecting with center line F.6. And from that center line, the exterior, or from F to G, those are referenced each other of 13 foot 7 inches apart. Okay. So that's how you would interpret that. So this is our alphabet of lines, and we can have a larger alphabet, but this is just a short little, that's why they say common lines used on drawings. There can be different, some more lines. I've seen them for gas. You see them for water lines. You'll see them for electric lines. So the lines vary in width. So you can notice down here the center line is thin compared to this border line, which is thicker, wider, darker. The border line is exactly what that is. Usually you'll see that around the border on the outside perimeter of the page, or to represent like a margin, or you'll see it within a drawing, crisscrossing, and there'll be little squares and pockets to create a border, so there'll be multiple drawings within a page. So here you see a property line. Very similar, looks very similar to the previous line we saw here, which was the center line. Notice the center line has a solid line, then a dash, then a solid line. This property line has a solid line, a dash, dash, and then a solid line. And so this is what it represents. And this is typical. And so again, a library of lines to ensure the reader that they know what they're looking at. When you see a solid dash dash and a solid dash solid next to each other, you could get confused. But if you know that the double dash represents the property line and the single dash represents the center line, then in your mind you make sense of those lines, and then you get a better idea of what you're looking at. An object line, notice that that is the line that represents a particular object, like the outside of a wall, or the outside of a column, or the outside of different objects. Could be, let's say, furnishings or cabinetry, whatever object is trying to be conveyed in the form of a solid line, right? The object that we're looking at will be made of a solid line. Not real thick, not real thin, but clearly visible, that will stand out next to other lines that might not be as dark or bright. This is example of the hidden line. You see dashes, sequential dashes of the certain length. There can be hidden lines, different hidden lines, and so you might have different size dashes in between them. Here, these are, fairly wide dashes in equal length. Now here's that center line we talked about. Again, solid dash solid, also not as thick as a property line, and not as dark. Over on this side, this is a different ways we can see dimension lines. These are all different ways that we see dimension lines, and these are all the different arrows. So you've got an actual fletched arrow, or it can be a dot that represents a point where those two lines intersect. This is an arrow that's not as sharp, but it's still an arrow nonetheless, representing the point. And then you see a slash. Just consider it half an arrow, if you would. And you can see that it slashes through the point at an angle, And you can, like here, you see multiple slashes. So these are the different ways you would see dimension lines. Okay. Notice they all point to the extension lines, and the extension lines go up through and usually past the distance of the dimension line a little. And here we have multiple dimensions stacked up on each other, so they'll extend longer. Here they're all referencing the same points, but you could have multiple dimension lines stacked up on each other like this. And then the other side, these could all reference one point, but all these other arrows could be referencing different points, and then you'd have different dimensions here representing what those are. Here you see this dimension line is broke up into two sections, right? It's measuring another section, this 8-inch section, where this is a 3-foot section, whatever it's measuring. These extension lines extend down to whatever object. So that measures 3 feet would be from here to here. And then from this same point to the next point is 8 inches, as we can see. And the different ways we would read or could represent, because sometimes the space gets so small you can't squeeze in the letter or the number of 8 inches by itself, or 0 feet 8 inches, which is another way to say 8 inches, or to have basically a point or an arrow to a, what was the line we called here? Liters, right? Liters. This number 8 is 8 inches, and it has a liter line pointing to this particular dimension line, telling you that it's this line that measured 8 inches. And here, this is liter line going in the opposite direction. Okay? So, where do we see border lines? Like I said, you usually see the border lines on the outskirts of the actual sheet or blueprint that we're reading. Okay? And there it is right there. You can see it's that thinner of the dark lines. This is also considered a border line, but it's the line that is the title box. So it's the or the margins, the outside. It's another form of border. So it's a wider border. So a border within a border. And then, so you can see, there's some dimension lines. We've got these dashed hidden lines that go to these symbols. It travels from here, swings around and goes from there. I would guess that when you usually see something swirling like that, going from point to point, it's sometimes could be something like an electrical wire or something like that. Again, you see these different arrows. They're in the form of slashes on your dimension lines. You see your dimensions lines. Make sure I got this right. Your dimensions lines have your extension lines, which extend. So your dimension lines have the numbers and the length, and that line goes from point to point, and it's telling you the dimension or the length of that line. And then extension lines cross through them, showing you where they extend to. So there are these lines here. Notice as the extension line gets really close to the object that it's pointing to, it doesn't actually touch. You see this little tiny space in there? I have some drawings that the lines get very close to, and that's architecturally not correct because it can be confusing. In order for an extension line, it extends very close to your object line, but it doesn't actually touch. So here we're looking at a print that shows a property line. So this particular print was showing you the border and a floor plan. And so you could see, we saw the object line. We could see some sort of dash solid line. Notice it's 2 dashes. So it's not a property line. So we could say that might be the center line. We saw the dashed line, which is definitely the hidden line. Some wire hidden. Property line. So the property line is a solid line with double dash, and you can see that there. Big solid line, double dash, and then it hits the corner. Solid line, double dash, solid. So it's showing you that this property line doesn't actually go all the way to the curb. It includes what looks like stairs, this driveway, which is part of a parking easement. This area here is the parking easement. So it looks like a parking area here. This looks like a drive path or a driveway. You can see part of the drawing. It says proposed building, first level, something, and the name of the place. You see there's a location for a generator, and it says compactor. So it's just showing you the property, a larger plan, a larger area, and you can see that it crosses over this parking area. So these parking spaces here, which look like parking spaces to me, and then this looks like some sort of pathway. At first I thought they were stairs because they have lines going through them, which still might be. I'm not 100% sure if this is a parking space area, but it kind of looks like it because this also looks like a parking space, and the property line covers these parking spaces too. This solid line here looks like it's the building. There's a solid object here. These lighter object lines are just kind of letting you know what's down on the ground. So object lines on a print. So we spoke about that. It's the solid line. So you see we're looking at this object here, which is this wall, which is in the shape of a T. And then within, and it goes all the way around, up, down, down in the other direction, back up. You see it continues all the way around. It's just showing you that line travels in, multiple lengths, and it's a physical object. That line represents the outside of a physical object. In this particular case, it's a wall. And that wall might not be solid. It might be hollow and be filled with something. It could be airspace. It could be insulation. It could be filled with concrete. So that's why there's a hash mark inside. If you see another line inside, crisscrossing inside. So it's showing you that this object, whatever it is filled with another piece of material that's taking up that space. While we're here, we might as well make reference to, okay, and here's another object line, you see? So you have another wall, and then you see what looks like these two semicircles. It's showing, and then you see those semicircles there, light dashed line here and a solid dashed line there. So, and then here we got this solid straight line here and a solid straight line there. That touches each end of the wall. These are doors, and this is a pair of doors, and it's showing you their path, their swinging path. If they were to swing and pivot at that point, they would travel in these little semicircles. But notice that they travel in a semicircle, and they have a solid line and then a hidden line, because it's telling you that although this is a pathway, it doesn't actually travel in that direction. So this door opens inward. This door is intended to swing outward across that solid line's path. And that's a hidden line, basically saying that although that's where it would go if it were to swing in that path, it doesn't actually swing across that path because the door doesn't go past flat. It closes and opens. Here it closes and opens. So it doesn't necessarily travel on this dashed path right here. Okay. Also, you'll notice that now these two object lines represent walls that are two walls within the building. You can see there's another wall here, very similar. And you can see it, the wall crosses through another door opening and then makes a return and goes down and crosses through another opening. Whatever it is, it's crossing through it's on the center line of, looks like number 10. Number 11 is very close, but it's another center line outside. You can see this wall travels right through this center line. Looks like number 10. And then that wall makes up, I think, what is considered the exterior of the building and then the interior of the building. And then the rooms get labeled. So you can see that this is intended to be a woman's bathroom, a men's bathroom, an office, another office, and even have office numbers. So office 107, office 108. It says carpet. Carpet is letting you know that the type of flooring that's going to go down in that room. Here you can see these squares in the men's and women's bathrooms. Probably because those represent maybe the tile on the floor. But whatever it is, there will be an enlarged plan because we can see by this note, it's telling us we want to get a closer look about what's happening in this room. There's an enlarged set of plans. So, another drawing that will zoom in and give you a larger view. Hidden lines. They're also part of the print. You can see the hidden line. Same drawing that we were looking at before. Right there. There's the hidden line, right? That says the line of mezzanine above. So a mezzanine is some type of overhang, something that's overhead. Could be like a shade structure. It could be some sort of walkway above. I'm not 100% sure on that. But it's telling you that there is a line of an object that's overhead or above, okay? And so that hidden line is a line that's overhead. Sometimes that line can be below. But the point is that it's a line traveling through that space, not at the same level as the wall. It's overhead, meaning over your head. So you could be walking through there. So walking across that line, you're passing under an object that's overhead. Center line. As I mentioned before, the center line has been traveling through the center of these walls here. So we could say center line number 9 is the best way to identify that line. Center line number 4.9. It doesn't really pass through any significant point of this wall or that wall, but it is referenced at some other point, some other location. This particular wall, you can see that center line 9 is significant because there are all of these walls that travel in that pathway that we've been looking at. The office wall, the stairway wall, whatever that is, and then continues down the side of this building. So it's an exterior wall here. Dimensions and extension lines. Okay, so we talked about the dimension lines, right, which tell you the length of a particular dimension from point to point. That's what we see here. Here's a dimension line, although we can't see the number. If we had a larger print, we could. But the point is, this dimension line here is crossing key points. And it is going across these center lines. And you can see here that it has a number, but it's not these center lines. It's all the way over there, right there. See that little crisscross? That's where the arrow of that dimension line is. And then it goes. So usually when you see the number or the dimension is in the center of that dimension line. So wherever this guy's pointing to, if we just saw that that's one side of the dimension line, then this guy is center lines, the other dimension lines way over here off this page. Okay, so we see the dimension line, we see the dimension, and we see the arrow or the extension line, where the extension line meets the dimension line, which is right between center lines 10 and 11. Okay, it's a little hard to read, but you can see here another example of a dimension line. Whatever it is, it's going up and down that path of the dimension line to a couple of points. Not exactly sure where they end and start, but if this is the center, I think it's somewhere around here. Because you see that one's got a extension line there for that dimension. So I think there's an extension line right there. And another extension line right here. Hard to see. Break lines. So you see we have this object line with the hash going through it, just like we saw. Just kind of saying that this is maybe a wall and that it's solid, could be filled with concrete or whatever. But you see that it's got this U shape, and then it continues across the break line, but you don't see what it wants. You could see that it would be continuing. This long break line is like saying, I'm only showing you from the side of one side of this line. See how it's got an arrow pointing down and an arrow pointing up? It's saying there's stuff on this side, but I'm not showing it to you. I'm only showing you the stuff on this side of this long break line. That's the way to understand that, okay? So that you focus your attention on this, on these objects that are on this side of the long break line. Now you'll also see what is referred to as a short break line, and it's used to show details underneath, or layers. You see, we see the full object. We see a hidden line underneath. Underneath what? We're not really sure. But because we're looking at something that could be in layers, we see something above and something below. And this short break line says, imagine there's a sheet here, and I were to break that sheet off like a cracker, right? And I were to snap the cracker, and the cracker were to be like a piece of plywood that covers an opening, you'd see that this dashed line or hidden line is now not hidden by the cracker, and it turns to a solid line. You see that? Whereas this solid line doesn't change because it's continuous. The cracker goes to the edge, meets the solid line, whereas the cracker covers the dashed line underneath. But since it's broken, snapped off, the short break line shows you what would have been underneath now is exposed, solid. Okay? So again, that's how you would see, visualize in your mind. Section cutting lines. So it's also used to identify section views, or also called cutting plane lines. Okay, so in the earlier drawing we saw this section line, or this cutting line with this flag. We could see section cut and the flag to one side of the line representing the direction that we're looking in. So if we slice through something like a loaf of bread, if I was looking at from the top down of the loaf of bread, looking down on a loaf of bread, here I'm looking down on it on the page, and I were to slice through it, the flag is pointing in the direction that I would be looking through the slice. And with the note over here on this side telling you that you could see whatever that slice looks like, the details on drawing G on page S12. Here, you'd see it on drawing F on page A5, or section F. And the arrow is the direction of the section view is facing. See? Same thing. Here it's just telling you this is section letter B, see here this is saying GS12 or FA5. This is telling you to go look on another page. In this particular case, it's telling you just to go look at another drawing called B, but it's not taking you to another page. So you could assume that that view is going to be on the same page. So this is why it only references another ID or another section within that page. So you can see, here's another example. You see you've got that, see there's that circle, and there's that arrow, like that flag there. But notice there's also an arrow around the circle. See how it looks like an arrow capped on top of the circle? And it's pointing also in the same direction that the section is facing. And you see what we're looking at in this plan view. It looks like I see some walls, I see some columns, I definitely see some center lines, some hidden lines there. I also see some big fat section, solid lines, which this looks like a stairwell. This looks like walking up a set of stairs, going to a landing, and then coming back and continuing to go up. You see this break line? There's that break line going right through the stairs. It's just saying once you get to that stair, it breaks, and then it shows you what's on the other side. But they show you real close together, but this is just saying that it could be a set of stairs. much longer than what we see here. Also, you can see this line traveling through the center of the stairs. It's like a path of travels, and you can see the arrow is pointing up. So this is saying from the lower level, you can walk up this path up the stairs, and you can see right before this break line there's another arrow, and it's actually pointing upwards. And then when you're on the other side of the break line, you can see there's another line, and it's an arrow pointing downwards. So if you were on a different set of drawings looking at this same plan, I don't say the second floor, you could find this drawing and you can see that the arrow's going to show it to you from the stairs going downwards. Dog's right here. Chase him away. Okay, wall legend and lighting symbol legend. So you can see in this particular case, we have a legend that's telling you when you're looking at an object that you're going to see a 2x4 or 2x6 stud wall without insulation. So that is this solid black line is a stud wall without insulation. This line, this other wall, which is a 2x4, 2x6 stud wall with insulation, you see the two object lines on the representing the outside or the thickness of the wall, and then this wavy, curly hash mark or hatching that fills the inside of the wall. That's telling you that it represents a wall with insulation in it. And then, pardon me, and you can see this is the foiled face bat insulation. So it's telling you that it's 4 foot wide from the top of the foundation. So again, just showing you that there's insulation and what that means. So that's the symbol for the insulation. This is the symbol for insulation filled wall. Okay. Over on this side, we have the lighting symbol legend. Lots of legends you will see. They all are intended to explain what you're looking at. And usually you'll see the legend on the title page of a particular section or the actual cover page. So in this case, these are the symbols for lightings. The square rectangular object is 2 foot wide and 4 foot long. When you see something like that in a particular plan, you'll know that it's a recessed lighting fixture with a lens, clear lens. Here you can see the same dimension rectangle, but with a half solid triangle and a half open triangle. It represents a night light fixture. So it is a fixture that would probably come on a time, be set on a timer and turn on at night. So it might be off in the daytime. You have dual powered, and that in a commercial building that would make sense because when you're trying to save energy, it's nighttime, the building is shut down. It'll be shut down and closed, but not totally dark, right? Because some of these rooms don't have windows, and a space could be totally pitch black with no light let in from the outside. So you have night lights that would come on when the main lights of the room were turned off. So here you see a circle with an X through it, and then which make 4 quadrants, and 2 of those quadrants get filled in solid, and then it looks like a little flat line with the line through it, and that's the symbol for a dual powered exit light. Okay, so I would expect to see that symbol on a floor plan or an electric plan close to the exit to a door. And if a room had 2 doors in it, commercial room, then I would expect to see one at over each door. So this symbol here, 2 circles with 2 lines coming out of it, that's the symbol for an exhaust fan. Okay, it doesn't really look like a fan blade, but it is a symbol nonetheless that represents an exhaust fan. So if you see that at a particular space, you know that it's intended that there's supposed to be a fan at that location. Here you see these little arrows, a rectangle, and a line through it. It's called a dual-powered emergency wall pack light. So I would guess that this long line here is where the wall would be, and then you'd see this symbol around a wall, knowing that it's what that object is a dual-powered emergency wall pack light. Okay. So dual-powered and a wall pack. So if you ever look in a commercial building, you may look up, say like at Walmart or something, you look around the wall, you might see somewhere near the door this little box with a couple of light fixtures pointing out of it. And that's what these little triangles are supposed to represent, a couple of little flood lamps off of a box, what they call a wall pack. And the wall pack is basically a box hanging or supported on the face of that wall overhead. And so those are emergency wall packs. So if emergency lights were to come on, the room is dark, fire alarms go on, this allows for emergency crews to be able to have visible light. Even though the lights in the building could be off, the emergency lights will be on, so people can still move around and navigate and travel. And it's for rescue workers as well, or it's to allow people to exit. So here we just see a circle within a circle. That in that particular plan, you'd see multiple ones, or maybe just one or two in a room, and it'd be telling you that that is a 150 watt, the W representing the watts, recessed can light. Here you see a circle with a crosshatch in it. That's telling you that it's a 100 watt recessed can light. Okay, so you might see a bunch of these symbols and a bunch of these symbols, and it's just telling you that they're can lights, but one's 150 watt and one's 100 watt. Go back. See, you've got this rectangular fixture. It's called a stair night light fixture. Very similar to this nightlight fixture we saw here that was 2 foot by 4 foot. This one looks, although there's no dimension, it looks like it's more like 1 foot by 4 foot, half that size or skinnier than the original nightlight. And that's something that you would see in a stairwell or a stair location. So not as large of a light fixture, but yet able to light the stairwell at night. This square is a 2 by 2 square, very similar to this 2 by 4 recessed light. Now this is a 2 by 2 recessed light. So square object, rectangular object. And you see its dimensions, 2 foot by 4 foot. If you had a scaled ruler, you could measure that on your set of plans that are to scale if they were prints. And you could, let's say it'll tell you that it's the drawing you're looking at is in 1/4 inch scale. Then you just find the 1/4 inch scale mark here. And then you can read it. And the numbers that represent 1/4 inch apart, they also represent a foot in length of what you're reading. Same thing, 2 by 2 nightlight fixture, half triangle going through it, nightlight fixture. So these symbols, they're not so important to you because you're not looking for them. But if you're the electrician and you're working with this set of plans, now these symbols have more meaning to you. Or you're discussing with the client the space and your lighting needs. You can say that, we've got too many light fixtures in this room, or we don't have enough light fixtures in this room. So these are those symbols as you would see them on a set of plans. So here we have this floor space, and you can see we've got this room with walls, stairwell here, this funny shaped wall with a door going through it. And then when you go into a room that's got this grid pattern. Is that grid overhead or is it down below? I'm not sure, but in this case, you notice that those same grids, these little squares, they just happen to line up with the light fixtures, that these recessed panel light fixtures. So I would think that these are square tiles that you would see, ceiling tiles, right, in a commercial building. And then where you do not have ceiling tiles, you would have these light fixtures, so they fit perfectly within the ceiling tile arrangement. So when you walk into this room and you see all this room full of this squares, those are squares overhead representing the ceiling tiles. Some people would call this a reverse ceiling plan. And so this is saying I am looking down on the ceiling from above in the reverse direction, and looking down on the ceiling, this is the grid pattern that I would want to follow, and the locations for all of these recessed lights. And then this is how I would space the squares in the room so that these light fixtures can be exactly at this location. So notice these light fixtures run down the length of the hallway here, pretty much in the center of the room. I've got a solid square on each side of this light fixture, and then a partial square and another partial square. But they look pretty much the same size. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ceiling tiles in a room, with the center ceiling tile basically running down the center of the room. And these two outer ceiling tiles are cut so that the location of this tile and these light fixtures run down this center length here. So this pattern of these ceiling tiles sets the locations for other light fixtures. You can see they travel in courses or rows or columns if you want to look at it that way. So these are abbreviations. So acoustic tile, that's what we were talking about just a moment ago. So ACT would be the symbol. I don't see anything telling me that there's some acoustic tile here. I just figured it out. I just assumed. AFF, that means above finished floor. So you'd have acoustic tile that would be located AFF, or above the finished floor. BLD represents the building. There might be a building line. BRG is bearing. Bearing is something that's supporting a load or carrying a weight overhead. So it might tell you that a column is bearing, load bearing. CJ could represent the line on the floor of concrete called the control joint. CLG means ceiling. So we can have an acoustic tile ceiling. So ACT, CLG, AFF, I can have an acoustic ceiling above finished floor. So you might see something that says ACT, CLG, AFF. What does that mean? It means acoustic tile ceiling above the finished floor. You're going to see that there might be lines, and it's telling you that this, and the line may go off the page, but it'll tell you that this is a continuous line. DET means detail, so it'll say see the detail. DN means down, like in a stairway. You might see that arrow that says DN, telling you I'm moving in a pathway going down. Or DS, if I'm looking exterior of a building and I see a little circle and I see a DS, maybe it's that little circle is the downspout going down the side of that building. EB could be expansion bolt. Maybe we're looking at a detail. that shows me a bolt that expands in a hole. EJ, an expansion joint. Now, anytime I see EJ, it doesn't necessarily mean that expansion joint. I'd have to go to this list of abbreviations on the page somewhere, noted somewhere, to tell me what EJ looks like. So when I see a drawing that says EB and EJ on a detail, I can, well, what does that mean? Otherwise, I can look at it and I can assume they're talking about an expansion joint or an expansion bolt. I can see a dashed line where a foundation would be, so I could assume that it is FDN means foundation. So sometimes you can kind of guess and be pretty close in the guess based on what you're looking at, because you understand what you're looking at. The abbreviations are really to not take up so much paper space, but yet it's meant for you to understand what you're looking at. Once you understand that, then you don't pay so much attention to it anymore. Finish floor, FIN means finish, FLR floor, FTG fitting or footing, right? You can have pipe fittings or you can have a concrete footing. So they both have the same type of, but if I was looking at a drawing, a detail of some concrete work, then I wouldn't expect it to be a fitting. GA could be the gauge, like steel. GALV, galvanized, is a coating that we see. So maybe we'd see a galvanized coating, usually on the exterior, because you're trying to protect it from the weather. So maybe a fence or a railing, that the outside would be galvanized. GYP is pretty typical for gypsum. Gypsum is another way, is the technical term for what we know as sheetrock. But sheetrock is made from gypsum, but sheetrock is a brand name. So there are other gypsum boards that have different brand names, but gypsum also can come in large chunks that you could use in concrete construction. HDW could just say hardware. We're talking about the hardware. So we got joints, kitchen, KIT, lavatory, LIN, linear, MFR, manufacturer, OC, on center, OD, outside diameter. So these are all abbreviations that we would see typical in a set of drawings. Okay, so I wouldn't say memorize them, but get familiar with them. Spend time with them. Read them often. And then, what is RET? Oh, it's a return. Yeah. Oh, it is the register. Okay. And then you start to remember it as the larger word. Okay, well, it pretty much covers it. Let's just take 10 minutes to complete your test your knowledge questions in your textbook, okay? So that's at the end of the chapter of Unit 4. And then come back. Hit pause and then come back in 10 minutes or whatever time you need. But I would just take 10 minutes, okay? These test your knowledge are not necessarily big quizzes meant to take a lot of time, okay? Hit pause, come back. Okay, you've now done your little quick test. Let's go over some of the answers. So, property line was the answer for number 1. Let's see. Let me go over that. I'm going to pause.